welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to go back in time to a magical time. I know I say that a lot, but it was a magical time when studios were buying up every Stephen King property they get their hands on to turn into a movie. Some pretty good, some decent, some not so good. And the movie I want to talk about today is 1990's Graveyard Shift. Now, this movie had a $10.5 million budget. When it was released on October 26th of that year, it only made 11.5 and change. It didn't do very well. Although it did open up to number one, but it didn't make a ton of money. Now, some of the Stephen King adaptations, around that time we had It, the miniseries, that very same year. A little bit before that, a year or two before that, we had the Pet Sematary adaptation, which was pretty good. Obviously, earlier in the 80s, we had John Carpenter's Christine. Back in the early 80s, late 70s, we had Salem's Lot miniseries directed by Tobe Hooper, I love that miniseries. That actually might be my favorite miniseries of all the Stephen King adaptations. I like It, but it falls apart in the second half, as we all know. And Storm of the Century is not bad. The Langolier, I never got into some of those. I've watched them all. Even though I haven't read all of Stephen King's books, I've always been fascinated with the movies made from his work. And like I said, around this time was very fashionable. They were gobbling up everything. 3 years later, we had The Dark Half come out and Needful Things all in the same year. And I like both those movies. I like Needful Things a lot. And I like The Dark Half. George Romero did a pretty good job with that film. And then, as we went on, we got more. We got Thinner in 96. And, they made a lot of them. And it became in vogue again. They brought It back. And they did the Pet Sematary remake, which I know some people didn't like. I thought it was all right. I didn't think it was awful. And then we got the Dr. Sleep movie, which was fantastic from last year. But we're talking about Graveyard Shift from 1990. This movie stars David Andrew as John, Kelly Wolfe as Jane. We got Stephen Mott as Warwick. I think I said his name right. And Brad Dourif as the Exterminator. That's the only thing he's listed as is the Exterminator. That's the only role that's his role. He's just the Exterminator. Now, this movie was directed by Ralph Singleton. I looked at this guy's list of what he's done in the movie industry, and he's mostly been a producer. He's only ever directed 3 things. So he was mostly just for producing. So I don't know how he got the job. I don't know how he got involved. I know originally Tom Savini was, in the 80s, Tom Savini was supposed to direct this film. But the studio didn't have a whole lot of interest in doing it, so he left the project, and then this gentleman stepped in, and they did it, and it was released in 90. Now, Brad Dourif is a great actor, and he's fantastic in the movie, even though his role's really not that big. Stephen Mott as the boss, I don't think he's the owner. They say Bachman's the owner of the mill. It's Bachman Mill, which they named it that because Stephen King wrote under Bachman, was his pseudonym. So they renamed the mill to Bachman Mill. And funny enough, this movie was filmed in the oldest of its kind textile mill in the country. The mill was built in 1821 in Harmony, Maine. That's where they shot this. Actually, this is one of the few Stephen King adaptations that were actually shot in Maine. As we all know, most of Stephen King's work takes place in Maine because that's where he lives. In Bangor, Maine, still has a house there. Although I think he winters in Florida. But most of his stories revolve around Maine, Castle Rock, Maine. But this movie was actually, this one and Thinner are really the only 2 filmed actually in Maine. I couldn't find any other ones that were filmed in Maine. But these 2 definitely were. This one, the whole movie was filmed in Maine. It was filmed in Harmony, Maine, where the mill was. Bangor, Maine, they filmed some stuff there. And Brewer, Maine. And so they actually filmed the whole movie up there. So good for them. Now, this movie, Stephen Mott's character as like the foreman, he does fine. He chews the scenery like freaking crazy in this movie. He's over the top, and you can tell he's probably having fun, and he's such a prick. David Andrews is pretty good as John, our lead, who's kind of like this guy who his wife had passed away. They don't say how. You don't really get to know a lot about most of these characters. Jane, played by Kelly Wolfe, she tells John about, because they kind of smitten on each other, so she kind of tells him a little bit about herself. But you don't really get to know any of these characters. It's a small town. People work at this mill. It's just reopened, and all of a sudden, the first shot of the movie is this guy working this machine in the basement of this mill. or as we come to find out later in the movie, one of the basements, because there's a lot of sub basements to this place. And he's hot, and he's doing his thing, and all of a sudden all these rats line up and are watching him, and he's like kind of yelling at him and cursing him, and all of a sudden they don't show the monster, but this thing shows up and he falls into the machine and gets killed. And that's when we're introduced to John, our main character, who's just got into town through hitchhiking. And he's looking for a job, and he sees the mill's hiring, goes in, and that's where he meets Stephen Mott's character, Warwick, and he applies for a job, and he gives it to him working the night shift, the graveyard shift, which is night shift. And he's going to do the same thing as this guy, and to be in the movie where he got killed, he's going to be running the same machine. And there's this big cleanup because the local health inspector, wants to close the mill because it's a disaster in the sub-basements. So he arranges over the 4th of July break that they're going to go. He's asked people to sign up for this cleaning crew, go down and clean it out. And he's a guy down there hanging lights who gets killed by this creature the creature is more like a half rat, half bat kind of creature. You don't ever get a whole look at the whole body, mostly just the head and its tail and its wings. You never get to see the whole thing. And it looks okay. I mean, you don't ever get a sense of it, how truly big it is. I mean, it has a big head, but you don't really get a good look at the whole thing. So it's hard to tell, but the effect looks pretty good overall. And people start disappearing, and for some reason the cops never show up to do an investigation. Nobody's questioning it. And people seem like they might know something about what's going on at this mill, but nobody ever says anything. And there's no indication where this creature came from. From what I understand, I've never read the short story this movie is based on, but in the short story, they kind of go into detail kind of how the creature came to be. I never read it, so I'm not going to get into that. But in the movie, they never go into that. You don't know where this creature, like why it is the way it is, how long it's been there. All you know is this mill is infested with rats, and Brad Dourif's job is to kill all the rats, and eventually he gets killed by going to the cemetery that's right down from the mill. It's right on this river, and he gets killed by a falling tombstone, and his head gets crushed. But so the night starts, and they start cleaning out the sub-basement. And it doesn't take long before people start getting killed by this creature, and they realize they're in danger. But they end up in one of these sub-basements they can't get up, so they're trying to find their way out. Stephen Mott's character loses his effing mind and kills Jane. So it's only him and John left, and they have and Stephen Mott's character ends up getting killed by the creature, and then John ends up getting up to where he normally would work at night, and he kills the creature with the machine that he would be using. And the creature gets caught in the machine, and he turns it on, and it kills it. And that's pretty much the end of the movie. It's only an 87-minute long movie. It goes really fast. There's a few cool gore moments. The practical effects look pretty decent. There's one shot in a movie that's a matte painting, and you'll know it when you see it. And the painting looks beautiful, but they didn't do a good job hiding it. You can tell it's a matte painting behind them. But that's old school. But still, they could have did a little bit of a better job trying to hide it, but you couldn't. The directing's fine. There's a couple creepy shots. It's nothing great. I mean, you would think almost this movie was made for TV. Besides the gore, and some of the effects are a little bit better than normally what you would see in a TV movie. I don't know why. This movie's not the greatest at all. I mean, there's a lot of things left out. You don't really know much about any of these characters besides just surface level stuff. Like the one guy that's on the cleanup crew has an infatuation with the fire hose that he gets to use to kill rats and clean up. He yells kind of like you'd think he's shooting a machine gun when he's shooting this hose. It's weird, man. The characters are fine. The acting's fine. It's nothing special. It's a fine movie, and for some reason I've always enjoyed watching it. Even though I know it's not a good movie, I would just watch this again last night because I own it. It's one of those Stephen King adaptations that wasn't handled with a lot of care. They kind of just went and made the movie, and it didn't do that great. And it's not one of the movies that has been talked about as being a great movie. It's not like The Shining or anything. But I like it. It's an okay, it's a B movie for sure, and it's just, it's a guilty pleasure kind of horror film. There's nothing wrong. Like I said, it's 87 minutes, so it's an easy to get through. Some things don't make sense. There's a lot of story missing. Like I said, I didn't read the short story that it's based on, so I don't know what's in that short story, if it fleshes it out anymore. Supposedly for the monster it does. I don't know about the characters. But I would give this movie A 6.75 out of 10. I can't give it 7. There's too many things holding it back, but I can watch it and enjoy it. I do watch it actually probably once in a while. I'll pull this out and watch it. It's just one of those movies I grew up with. I remember renting this at the video store and watching it multiple times, and I've always just enjoyed watching this film. It's not the greatest, and it'll never be mentioned as one of the best Stephen King adaptations. No way. Like John Carpenter's Christine, The Shining are way better than this movie. It's just one of those movies I grew up with that I kind of have nostalgia for, and I can still watch it. It's competently made. It's nothing, but like I said, it's nothing special. But it's a fun little horror flick to watch. You know, Brad Dourif's having fun chewing the scenery too as the exterminator. It's just serviceable enough to get through. It's not one of the worst Stephen King adaptations, but it's definitely not one of the best. It's kind of just the middle of the road kind of one. But yeah, that's it for me. I give Graveyard Shift a 6.75 out of 10. If you've ever seen it, let me know down below what you think of this film. Did you rent it when you were a kid like I did? I know it's not one that I see played very much on any. I don't think it's on any streaming services. Maybe Amazon Prime. I don't think it's on Netflix. I doubt it. But yeah, that's it for me for Graveyard Shift. Have a great day, and I'll be back soon. Thanks.